When it comes to the end of the year or the end of the quarter, the last thing you want to do is waste your time. The last thing you can afford to do is waste your time, because time is money. You're getting to the end of that time period, whatever it is, and there are things that just have to get done. And meetings, most people agree, meetings are the big culprit. They're the big time suck, and they're the place where we can lose that traction on the time that we actually need to get the things done that need to get done at the end of that time period. People have, on average, at least 62 meetings per month. And if you're a leader at a higher level, if you're an executive, you've got a ton more meetings than that. Middle managers typically have 30% of their time that just gets sucked into meetings. And then there's the absolutely unnecessary meetings. On average, people are going to spend 9,000 hours over the course of their career in meetings, and about 2,000 of those hours are going to be wasted time. They're going to be unnecessary meetings. And the statistic is that unnecessary meetings cost U.S. companies about $37 billion annually. That's a lot of wasted money, and it's a lot of wasted time. And the last thing that you can do at this particular time period is to waste that time. So you've got to take charge of your time. And when it comes to meetings, you've got to make some big decisions. Are there meetings that you don't need to go to? And can you make the case that you don't need to go there? But what about the meetings that you absolutely do need to go to? All that time gets wasted. Even if it's a necessary meeting, its time is unnecessarily wasted in that important meeting. And so let's look at 3 ways you can be sure that your time does not go down that proverbial road of being absolutely lost because the meetings you had to go to were not spent and were not dealt with, were not managed in the best way. First, when it comes to meetings and all the time that is wasted in meetings, the big issue is indeed time, is to think about how can we best manage our time in this meeting. And there's 3 things I want you to think about. Number 1, with time, shorten the meeting. Make 30-minute meetings 20-minute meetings. Make 60-minute meetings 50-minute meetings. That's going to do 2 things. It's going to force you to be really productive, force the group to be really productive during that meeting so that you could get done in that time frame. So you're not going to bleed over into the next meeting. And it's also going to give you a little buffer time from one meeting to the next meeting. So you have a chance to gather your thoughts, jot down any notes you need to from the meeting you just attended, and get ready quickly. Assemble your notes that you've already done. You've already prepped for that next meeting, and get those out and get ready for that next meeting. Secondly, you want to think about having a time frame for each item in a meeting. So there's 4 items we're going to cover. The first item is the big one. That's going to, in a 20-minute meeting, that first item is going to take 10 minutes. And then we've got an item that's going to take 5 minutes. And then there's something that's really quick. That's a 2-minute item. So assign time frames to items and meetings so people know what to expect and are not going to go over. Which leads us to our third point, which is have a timekeeper. Make sure you have someone, it is their job to keep track of the time in the meeting and to let people know, here's where we are. Hey, we're coming up on time to end this first item. We need to go on to the second item, and then the team can decide if it's important enough to violate the time frames that we'd set up and to keep going on that first item, or to say, hey, we got to stop now and we got to just run with what we have. Let's move on to the second piece. So have a timekeeper. Also, cut down your meeting time, and then each agenda item has a time frame. That's going to save you a tremendous amount of time. Second, in order to make the best use of your time in meetings and not waste your time and not waste everybody's time in meetings, you've got to focus. Every meeting has to have focus. And you can't just say, hey, let's focus here. You've got to bake the focus in. You got to plan the focus in. And there's 4 very specific things you got to do. Number 1, have a purpose of the meeting. Why are we gathering together? We're gathering to talk about the numbers on XYZ project. We're gathering to discuss the pros and cons of these 2 different options, these 2 different systems that we might choose to go with. We're going to gather to discuss this. What is the purpose of that meeting? And then secondly, it's not just the purpose, but then the purpose is like the topic. Secondly, you got to have an objective, meaning an outcome. Ultimately, what do you want to get to by the end of the meeting? So if the purpose is to talk about the two systems, then outcome/objective is by the end, we need to have decided, weighed those pros and cons. We need to have decided, chosen, voted on, just decided which system we're going to go with. So what do we need to have at the end? The third, everybody needs to know why this meeting matters, why this purpose, why this objective, why it matters. Just be sure that that is clear for people, because if not, they're not going to come. They're going to drag their feet. Everyone's not going to be mentally, emotionally invested, and it's going to be a waste of time. And then fourth, of course, please, please, please have an agenda. Every meeting absolutely needs an agenda. Did you know that 63% of meetings are conducted with no agreed upon agenda? That is a colossal waste of time. So you want to have that agenda, put it together ahead of time so that people can prepare and they can come prepared, which is going to save time in the meeting. You might consider a Google Doc, some kind of a shared document that you can create the agenda for the meeting, and if it is a collaborative affair, then to share it with people and say, everybody, what are additional topics that need to be discussed in the meeting? That's your choice. To what extent you're controlling it, you're inviting that collaboration, but have those four pieces. You're having a purpose, you're having an objective / outcome, you're having why it matters, why it all matters, and then have that agenda. Third, meetings can go off track. We have all been in meetings where we ran out of time, where there was a lot of sidebar, where there was a lot of tangents, where there was wandering off, there was meandering, and there was a colossal waste of time in the meeting. And so not only do you want to have an initial focus for the meeting, but you also need to be absolutely ready to recalibrate. And when you recalibrate, there's really three things you want to think about. Number one, you want to call out what's happening and really call a spade and be gentle, but you're going to say, hey, everyone, it seems like we're getting a little off track here. So what is it that we're really trying to decide? Let's get really clear on that. Just might call it out. Might say, why don't we take a minute and review what we're trying to accomplish here? So there's no just beating around the bush. There's no, we're just going to kind of let it go and let it go crazy. No, we're going to step in and we're going to call it what it is, so that we can reset and get back on track. And secondly, if you need to get unstuck, several ways to get unstuck. If something becomes complicated, and maybe there are two people who have a really strong opinion about it, and it's actually more their purview, you're going to say, you know what, everybody, let's stop talking about this here. Let's assign this to you two. If you would go off and do some brainstorming around that, do some research on that, and bring it back to us at the next meeting. And that way you can save time, and you have the people who really should be talking about it, talk about it. And sometimes, it's just time to, if you're off track, sometimes it's just time to take a vote. Time to take a vote on, we've discussed it enough, now we're going in circles, let's take a vote to decide which direction we're going. And you might just need to remind people about consensus and what consensus is. People will say, well, I can't really agree to that because I don't love that option. And consensus isn't about everybody loving the option we choose. It's about finding an option that in a disparate group of people, we can come together and finding the one that everyone can at least live with. So you might need to remind people of that so that you can get unstuck and move forward. Third, one of the biggest reasons that meetings go terribly off track is that there's no agreed upon roles, and there's no agreed upon assignment of roles. Who's doing what in the meeting? Who's responsible for what in the meeting? And so we get into this room and it becomes this free-for-all, and we've got nobody who has the responsibility to corral us in, because you get a bunch of smart people, you get a bunch of opinionated people in the room together, and there's going to be some lively discussion. And if we don't just want to have discussion, but we actually want to make progress, then we got to have people whose responsibility it is to help us do that. So 3 roles I want you to think about. Number 1 is, of course, the leader. And the leader is the one, it's their responsibility to intervene and to call a spade when we're getting off track. And I want to caution you on this. If you are formally the leader in your group, if you're the manager, if you're the leader, if you're the director, if you're the VP in your group, I cannot tell you how many times I've had people come to me and say, our meetings are such a waste of time because our leader, our manager, director, VP, whoever, doesn't really manage the meeting. And so if you're in a leadership role, here's my call to you, and that is to manage these meetings so that you can save everyone's time. And really, really be sure that you are not the long-winded one, because that's one of the biggest mistakes I see people at higher levels and executive levels make, and that is to talk a lot and take up a lot of the airtime. And instead, you want to do listening, because you're going to learn a lot from your team. The second role is the timekeeper, and you got to assign a person to keep time and to keep us on track, and it is their job to speak up and say, hey, it's time to move on to the next topic. Hey, we've got 2 minutes left on this topic before we move on to the next topic, and make sure that everybody knows that it is that person's job to speak up and call the time at certain times, because otherwise you'll have time-conscious people who might be the timekeeper and are really good at that job. You'll have people who are not time conscious who get irritated when that person speaks up. And I've had firsthand experience with that. And when they get irritated, then the energy gets all wrong in the room, and then it's hard to move forward together as a team. And then the third role is the scribe, someone to take notes. And so if it's an online meeting, that person should call up a Word document, some kind of document, and be taking notes on the things that you are brainstorming, the things that you are talking about, so that people can say, actually, that's not what I said. I actually said this, et cetera, et cetera. Let's keep it really clear. Let's be sure that we're taking accurate notes. And it's great if everyone can see the notes. If you're in a conference room together, someone jump up to a whiteboard or jump up to a flip chart. So when things are discussed or things are brainstormed, everybody can see what it is. And then, so stop wasting your time in meetings. You can't afford to do that. You have other really important things to do. So if you can't get out of the meeting, and if it's a really important meeting for you to be at, then think about your time. Can we shorten this meeting? Can we assign time frames for each item? Can we have a timekeeper? Think about your focus. Do we have a purpose and an agenda? Are we on track? Do we know what we need to get out of this meeting? And then be sure there's roles. Be sure we've got a strong leader, strong timekeeper, strong scribe, so that you can make the most of those meetings and then get out and get on with the things that you need to get done.